Commander Zephyx of the Galactic Council's Research Division had seen many strange things in his 40 cycles of service. He had witnessed the crystalline warriors of Vega Prime dissolve mountains with their sonic screams. He had observed the gas dwellers of Nebula 7 phase through solid matter as easily as breathing. But nothing had prepared him for what lay before him now. The human colony ship, Endurance, drifted silently through the void, its hull scarred by what appeared to be plasma burns and kinetic impacts. The vessel had been adrift for 3 standard months when the Council's patrol fleet discovered it near the contested border systems. Initial scans showed life signs aboard, but the energy readings were unlike anything in their databases. "Sir, we're getting some very unusual readings from that vessel," reported Lieutenant Crix, her tentacles dancing nervously over the sensor controls. "The structural integrity should have failed weeks ago, but somehow it's still holding together." Zephyx studied the tactical display with growing concern. The ship's armor plating showed damage patterns that defied conventional understanding of space combat. Massive gouges ran along the hull where no known weapon should have been able to penetrate. More disturbing still were the makeshift repairs visible across the surface, crude metal patches welded directly onto the hull using what appeared to be salvaged materials. "Have you identified the attackers?" Zephyx asked, his scaled fingers tapping against his command chair. "That's the strange part, sir. The damage patterns don't match any known weapons in our database. Some of these impacts appear to have been made by rocks, sir." "Rocks?" Zephyx's crest flattened against his skull in confusion. No civilized species had used kinetic projectiles for warfare in over 1,000 cycles. Even the most primitive races the Council had encountered understood energy weapons. The boarding party consisted of Zephyx himself, 2 security officers, and Dr. Veln, the fleet's xenobiologist. As they approached the airlock, their environmental suits registered atmosphere composition readings that made Dr. Veln's eye stalks twitch with surprise. "Commander, the atmospheric mix is highly unusual. Oxygen levels are far above what most species consider safe, and there are trace amounts of what appears to be adrenaline compounds in the air itself." The airlock cycled, and they stepped into a corridor that looked more like a battlefield than the interior of a passenger vessel. Blast marks scorched the walls, and improvised barricades constructed from furniture and metal plating blocked several passages. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows that seemed to move with each flicker. "Hello?" Zephyx called out, his voice echoing through the damaged corridor. "This is Commander Zephyx of the Galactic Council. We're here to offer assistance." A sound reached them from deeper in the ship, a rhythmic thumping that seemed almost like music? But there was something primal about it. Something that made Zephyx's instincts scream danger, even though his rational mind recognized it as non-threatening. They followed the sound through a maze of damaged passages, noting the ingenious repairs and modifications along the way. Whoever these humans were, they possessed an almost supernatural ability to improvise and adapt. Weapons had been crafted from ship components, armor pieced together from hull plating, and entire sections of the vessel reconfigured for purposes that weren't immediately apparent. The sound led them to what had once been the ship's main cargo hold. Now it had been transformed into something that made Zephyx's blood run cold. The space was filled with makeshift training equipment, weights constructed from engine components, obstacle courses built from debris, and targets that showed signs of repeated impact from various projectiles. But it was the inhabitants that truly shocked them. A group of humans sat in a circle near the center of the hold, their bodies showing signs of recent combat. Bandages covered wounds that would have killed most council species. Yet these beings appeared to be engaged in what could only be described as casual conversation. One of them, a female with scars running across her face, was methodically cleaning what appeared to be a weapon constructed entirely from salvaged materials. When they noticed the boarding party, the humans' reaction was swift but controlled. Weapons appeared in their hands with fluid precision, and they arranged themselves in a defensive formation that spoke of extensive combat experience. But what disturbed Zephyx most was their calmness. There was no panic, no fear, only the cold, calculating assessment of potential threats. "Council representatives," the scarred female said, lowering her weapon slightly. "We were wondering when you'd show up. I'm Captain Sarah Chen, formerly of the Earth Colonial Marine Corps." Dr. Veln stepped forward, his scanner active. "Captain Chen, we're here to provide medical assistance and safe passage to the nearest council station. Our scans indicate you've sustained significant injuries." Chen laughed, and the sound sent chills down Zephyx's spine. "Injuries? Doc, what you're seeing here are healing wounds from our last engagement with the Void Stalkers. We've been fighting them for months." Void Stalkers? Zephyx had never heard the term, but something about it made his combat instincts twitch. "Nasty creatures." Another human, this one missing his left arm but showing no signs of distress about it, chimed in. 8 feet tall, razor-sharp claws, hive-mind intelligence. They've been hunting human colonies along the rim for the past year." Zephyx exchanged glances with his team. No such species existed in council records, yet these humans spoke of them as if they were common knowledge. More disturbing still, they spoke of fighting them as if it were routine. "Perhaps you could show us your medical bay," Dr. Veln suggested. "We'd like to understand how you've managed to survive such extensive injuries." Chen nodded and led them through another series of damaged corridors to what had once been the ship's medical facility. What they found there defied all understanding of xenobiology. Humans with wounds that should have been fatal were not only conscious but actively participating in ship operations. One individual was performing delicate electronic repairs while sporting what appeared to be a recently sutured abdominal wound. "How is this possible?" Dr. Veln whispered to Zephyx. "Their pain tolerance alone exceeds anything in our medical databases." But it was Chen's next words that truly shook them to their core. "Doc, you want to see something really interesting? Show them the trophy room, Marcus." The one-armed human grinned and led them to another section of the ship. What they found there made Zephyx's knees weak. Mounted on the walls were what could only be described as trophies: claws, teeth, and other biological samples from creatures that looked like they belonged in nightmares rather than reality. "Void Stalker hunting season was pretty good this year," Marcus said casually, gesturing to a particularly large set of claws. "That big one there, we took down with nothing but improvised explosives and a lot of patience." Dr. Veln was frantically taking readings, his equipment barely able to process what it was detecting. "Commander, these biological samples, they're from apex predators. Multiple species, all of them capable of tearing through most known armor types. And these humans, they hunted them?" Chen overheard and nodded. "Had to. They were threatening our colony worlds. The Council fleet response time out here is pretty slow, so we handle things ourselves." "But how?" Zephyx managed to ask. "These creatures, based on these samples, should have been capable of devastating entire fleets." The humans exchanged looks, and Zephyx realized they were trying to figure out how to explain something they considered obvious. "Commander," Chen said slowly, "where we come from, everything wants to kill you. The plants, the animals, the weather, even the bacteria. We've been fighting for survival since before we could walk upright. These Void Stalkers? They're dangerous, sure, but they're just another predator species. And humans, well, we're the apex predator." The casual way she said it, as if stating an obvious fact, made Zephyx's blood run cold. He was beginning to realize that the Council's understanding of human capabilities might be severely lacking. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "you could tell us more about your recent engagements with these creatures. For our records." Chen smiled. and there was something predatory in that expression that made every instinct Zephyx possessed scream warnings. "Sure thing, Commander, but you might want to sit down for this one. It's quite a story." Captain Chen settled into a chair that had clearly been salvaged from somewhere else on the ship, her weathered hands folding together as she began her tale. Zephyx and his team found themselves unconsciously leaning forward, drawn by something in her voice that promised revelations they weren't sure they wanted to hear. "It started about 8 months ago," Chen began, her eyes focusing on something far beyond the bulkheads. "The mining colony on Kepler 442b went dark. Standard procedure called for a council investigation, but you know how long that takes. By the time the paperwork cleared and a ship was dispatched, we'd already lost 3 more settlements." Dr. Vellne's tentacles writhed nervously. "What was the nature of the attacks?" Marcus, the one-armed human, laughed bitterly. "Doc, you ever seen what happens when a pack of creatures designed by evolution's worst nightmare decides to hunt something? These void stalkers, they don't just kill. They study their prey first, learn their patterns, their weaknesses, their fears. The first colony we investigated," Chen continued, "looked like it had been hit by a natural disaster. Buildings torn apart, equipment scattered, but no bodies. It wasn't until we found the breeding chambers that we understood what we were dealing with." "Breeding chambers?" Zephyx's scaled skin began to change color, a sure sign of distress among his species. Another human, a woman with intricate scars covering her arms, spoke up. "They were using the colonists as incubators, keeping them alive while their young gestated inside them. We found 43 people still conscious, still aware, with those things growing inside them." The casual way she described it, as if discussing the weather, made Zephyx's stomach churn. But what truly horrified him was what came next. "So we did what had to be done," the woman continued. "Mercy killings, then we burned the whole complex down with the creatures inside. But not before we learned something important. They could be killed." Dr. Vellne was frantically taking notes, his instruments registering stress readings from all the humans present. But their stress wasn't from traumatic memories. It was excitement. They were reliving a hunt, and they had enjoyed it. "The second colony was where things got interesting," Chen said, standing and walking over to a tactical display that had been jury-rigged from various ship components. The stalkers had learned from the first encounter. They knew humans were coming, so they prepared. The display showed a 3-dimensional representation of a settlement under siege. Zephyx could see the tactical genius of the stalkers' approach. Systematic isolation of defenders, psychological warfare through targeted attacks on civilians, and adaptive strategies that countered each human response. "They'd turned the entire settlement into a trap," Marcus explained, pointing to various locations on the display. "Motion sensors made from colonist neural tissue, weapons platforms constructed from mining equipment, and a command center located in what used to be the school." "How many of you survived that engagement?" Zephyx asked, though he was beginning to dread the answer. "All of us," Chen replied simply. "Though it took us 6 days. 6 days? Dr. Vellne's eye stalks quivered. Against creatures that had turned an entire settlement into a fortress. The humans exchanged those looks again, the kind that suggested they were trying to translate an obvious concept into terms aliens could understand. "Doc," the scarred woman said gently, "you have to understand something about humans. We don't just fight to win. We fight to eliminate the threat permanently. Those stalkers had made a mistake. They'd given us time to study them back." Chen activated another section of the display, showing detailed biological schematics that made Zephyx's blood run cold. They were anatomical studies of the void stalkers, complete with notes about weak points, behavioral patterns, and tactical assessments. "Day 1, We lost 3 people to their initial ambush, Chen narrated. Day 2, we started adapting. Their claws couldn't penetrate improvised armor made from mining equipment. Their acid spit could be neutralized with alkaline compounds from the chemical storage. Their hive-mind coordination had a limited range. Day 3, Marcus picked up the narrative. We started hunting them back. See, they'd expected us to try to escape or call for help. They hadn't expected us to start taking trophies. The casual mention of trophy-taking made Zephyx realize he was beginning to understand something fundamental about human psychology that the Council had completely missed. These weren't just survivors. They were predators who had been activated by the presence of worthy prey. The stalkers made another mistake on Day 4, the scarred woman continued. They tried psychological warfare, started broadcasting the screams of captured colonists over the settlement's communication system. That must have been devastating to morale, Dr. Veln observed. The humans looked at each other and began laughing. Not the nervous laughter of trauma survivors, but the genuine amusement of people remembering a particularly good joke. Oh, it was devastating, all right, Chen said through her chuckles. Devastating to the stalkers. See, they thought those screams would break our will to fight. Instead, they just told us exactly where to find them. Zephyx felt something cold settle in his stomach. You used the psychological warfare as a tactical advantage? More than that, Marcus said, his grin showing entirely too many teeth. We used it as bait. Started broadcasting human voices in distress from different locations, drew the stalkers into kill zones we'd prepared. The tactical display shifted again, showing the settlement layout with human positions marked in blue and stalker movements in red. What Zephyx saw was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare that would have impressed the Council's best military strategists. Day 5 was when we started the real hunt, Chen continued. See, by then we'd figured out their breeding cycle, their command structure, and most importantly, their fear responses. Fear responses? Dr. Veln leaned forward. Apex predators rarely demonstrate fear. Everything demonstrates fear when it realizes it's being hunted by something more dangerous than itself, the scarred woman said quietly. And humans, Doc. We're very good at being the most dangerous thing in any given environment. Chen pulled up a video feed from what appeared to be helmet-mounted cameras. This is from Day 6. Warning, the footage is graphic. What followed was the most disturbing piece of combat footage Zephyx had ever witnessed. Not because of the violence, though that was certainly present, but because of the cold, methodical way the humans went about their work. They moved through the settlement like a coordinated organism, each one anticipating the other's actions with uncanny precision. The stalkers, despite their obvious physical advantages, were clearly outmatched. They fought with the desperation of creatures that had suddenly found themselves on the wrong end of the food chain. Their acid attacks were deflected by improvised shields. Their claws skittered harmlessly off jury-rigged armor. Their hive-mind coordination crumbled under the human psychological warfare tactics. But what truly horrified Zephyx was the efficiency of it all. This wasn't a desperate last stand. This was a carefully orchestrated extermination campaign. The last stalker tried to negotiate, Chen said as the footage showed a creature attempting to communicate through a translation device. It offered to leave human space permanently in exchange for its life. What did you do? Zephyx asked, though part of him already knew. We explained to it that humans don't negotiate with apex predators, Marcus replied. There can only be one. The footage ended with the humans methodically destroying the stalkers' breeding chambers, their command center, and every trace of their presence in the settlement. But they didn't stop there. The final shots showed them carefully documenting every aspect of stalker biology, technology, and tactics. We spent 2 weeks after that hunting down every stalker in the system, Chen concluded. Couldn't risk them regrouping and trying again. By the time we were done, We'd eliminated the species from 3 star systems and collected enough data to prevent them from ever being a threat again. Dr. Veln was staring at his readings in disbelief. Captain, according to my scans, you're describing the systematic extermination of an entire species. An intelligent species. Chen's expression didn't change. Doc, they made the mistake of hunting humans. There are consequences for that. Zephyx realized that his understanding of human capabilities had been fundamentally flawed. These weren't just survivors from some backwater world. They were representatives of a species that had evolved in conditions so hostile that they'd become something the galaxy had never seen before. Captain, he said slowly, I think we need to discuss your people's integration into Council space. There may be some adjustments needed to our current protocols. Chen smiled, and for the first time since boarding the ship, Zephyx felt like he was looking at something that might actually be friendly. Commander, I think that's a very good idea. Because what I've told you so far? That was just one engagement. You want to hear about the real battles. You're going to need to understand what Earth was like before we left it. 3 days had passed since Commander Zephyx and his team first boarded the human vessel. What was supposed to be a simple rescue mission had turned into the most important intelligence-gathering operation in Council history. The humans had agreed to share their knowledge, but each revelation made Zephyx question everything the Council thought it knew about warfare, survival, and what it meant to be an apex species. Dr. Veln had barely slept, spending every available moment documenting human physiology, psychology, and tactical capabilities. His preliminary reports had already caused panic among the Council's military advisors. Now, as they gathered in the ship's modified conference room, Zephyx was about to learn why. Commander, Captain Chen began, settling into her chair with the fluid grace of someone perpetually ready for combat. Before we talk about Earth, you need to understand something fundamental about human evolution. We didn't evolve on a normal world. She activated the holographic display, and suddenly the room was filled with images that made Zephyx's survival instincts scream warnings. Massive predators with teeth the size of his arm, poisonous plants that could kill with a touch, weather patterns that could level entire cities in minutes. Earth, Marcus said, his remaining hand gesturing casually at creatures that would give Council generals nightmares, is what xenobiologists call a Class 12 Deathworld. That's the highest classification in the known galaxy. Dr. Veln's tentacles writhed nervously. I'm familiar with the classification system. Class 12 worlds are considered uninhabitable by any intelligent species. The survival rate for expeditions to such worlds is less than 3%. The humans looked at each other with that expression Zephyx was learning to dread. The one that meant they were about to explain something they found obvious, but would fundamentally reshape his understanding of reality. Doc, the scarred woman, who'd introduced herself as Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez, said gently, humans didn't visit a Class 12 death world. We evolved on one, for 4 million years. The holographic display shifted, showing the evolutionary timeline of humanity. Zephyx watched in growing horror as the presentation detailed how humans had survived not just one extinction event, but dozens. How they'd competed with predators that made the Voidstalkers look like domesticated pets. How they'd developed tools not for convenience, but for survival against creatures that could tear them apart with ease. You see this? Chen pointed to an image of early humans hunting something that looked like a cross between a bear and a nightmare. These are our ancestors. They didn't have claws or armor plates or venom. They had rocks, sticks, and something that no other species in the galaxy has ever developed to the same degree. What's that? Zephyx asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer would terrify him. Persistence, Rodriguez answered. The ability to keep going when every logical instinct says to give up, to adapt, improvise, and overcome no matter what the odds. The display showed human ancestors tracking prey across vast distances, wearing them down through sheer endurance. But more disturbing were the images of early human warfare, not the clean, technological combat the Council was familiar with, but brutal. Close quarters fighting where victory went to whoever could endure the most pain and still keep fighting. The thing about evolving on a Deathworld, Marcus continued, is that everything is trying to kill you all the time. So you develop some interesting survival traits. Dr. Veln was furiously taking notes. Such as? Chen smiled, and Zephyx realized he'd grown to fear that expression. Want a demonstration? Before anyone could respond, she pulled out a knife and drew it across her palm, opening a wound that would have sent most council species into shock. Blood flowed freely, but Chen's expression never changed. She simply wrapped the wound in a piece of cloth and continued talking as if nothing had happened. Pain tolerance? She said calmly. Humans can function at full capacity with injuries that would incapacitate other species. We've had to, because on Earth, showing weakness means death. Dr. Veln was staring at his medical scanner in disbelief. Captain, your heart rate barely elevated. The pain signals your nervous system is transmitting should be overwhelming. Doc, this is nothing, Rodriguez laughed. You want to see impressive? Show him the bone density scans. The medical data that appeared on the display made Zephyx question his understanding of biology. Human bones were nearly twice as dense as those of comparable species. Their muscles contained redundant systems that allowed them to continue functioning even when severely damaged, and their nervous systems could literally shut off pain receptors during combat situations. These adaptations, Dr. Veln whispered, they're not just physical. Commander, look at these brain scans. The neurological data was perhaps the most disturbing yet. Human brains showed activity patterns unlike any known species. They could literally compartmentalize trauma while continuing to function, could enter altered states of consciousness during combat that increased reaction time and pain tolerance, and most frighteningly, could suppress normal survival instincts when protecting others. That's the pack bonding instinct, Marcus explained, noticing Zephyx's horrified expression. Humans will literally die to protect members of their group. Not just family members, anyone they consider part of their pack. But that's... Zephyx struggled to find words. That's evolutionarily counterproductive. Is it? Chen asked quietly. Commander, how many species in Council space would voluntarily enter a combat zone to rescue strangers? Zephyx thought about it and realized the answer was essentially none. Most civilized species had evolved past such dangerous altruistic behaviors. They had protocols, procedures, committees to evaluate risk versus benefit. Humans don't evaluate risk the same way other species do, Rodriguez continued. We don't ask if we can survive something. We ask if it needs to be done. The holographic display shifted again, showing footage from various human conflicts throughout their history. Not just the recent engagements with the Void Stalkers, but centuries of warfare that had shaped human psychology and tactics. This is why the Stalkers never had a chance, Chen explained, as the footage showed human soldiers advancing under conditions that should have been impossible to survive. They thought they were fighting another normal species, but humans aren't normal. We're the result of millions of years of evolution in hell. What followed was a comprehensive breakdown of human military psychology that made Zephyx understand why his species had never developed effective warfare. Humans didn't just fight to win. They fought to ensure their enemies could never threaten anyone again. They took risks that bordered on insanity, not because they didn't understand the dangers, but because they'd calculated that allowing threats to survive was more dangerous in the long term. The most important thing you need to understand about human warfare, Marcus said, pulling up tactical analyses from various conflicts, is that we don't just fight with weapons, we fight with our entire civilization. The display showed how human combat effectiveness increased exponentially when they had something to protect. how their tactical flexibility allowed them to adapt to any enemy strategy within hours of first contact, how their pack-bonding instincts turned individual soldiers into components of a larger organism that could coordinate without communication. "But surely there must be limits to these capabilities," Dr. Velln protested. "No species can be effective against every possible threat." The humans exchanged those looks again, and Zephyx realized they were about to learn something that would change Council military doctrine forever. "Doc," Chen said quietly, "humans have never encountered a threat we couldn't eventually overcome. Not once in our entire evolutionary history." That's statistically impossible," Zephyx stammered. "Commander," Rodriguez said, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something to a child. "Humans extinct species as a hobby. On Earth, we drove creatures to extinction by accident while we were busy fighting each other. We didn't even notice we were doing it." The final holographic display showed Earth's extinction record during human history. Hundreds of species had vanished, not due to climate change or natural disasters, but simply because humans had proven better at surviving. They'd outcompeted apex predators without even trying. "The Council's integration protocols," Chen continued, "they're designed for normal species that evolved on worlds where survival was possible through cooperation and compromise. Humans evolved where survival was only possible through victory." Dr. Velln was reviewing his data with growing alarm. "Commander, based on these physiological and psychological profiles, humans shouldn't be classified as a standard sapient species. They're something entirely different." "What do you recommend, Doctor?" Zephyx asked, though he was beginning to understand the implications. "Sir, I recommend we treat humanity as what they actually are. The galaxy's first and only true apex predator species. They've evolved past the point where normal diplomatic protocols apply." Chen stood up, and even though the gesture was friendly, every instinct Zephyx possessed recognized it as the movement of something that could kill him without effort. "Commander, the Council has a choice to make," she said calmly. "You can treat humans as allies, in which case you'll have the most effective military force in galactic history watching your back, or you can treat us as a threat, in which case—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The implications were clear. "What do you want from the Council?" Zephyx asked. "Nothing complicated," Chen replied. "Just recognition that human space is human space, and anyone who threatens human colonies will discover why Earth is the only death world that evolved a species capable of leaving it." Zephyx looked at his team, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their expressions. They'd come here to rescue survivors. Instead, they'd discovered that the galaxy's power balance had just fundamentally shifted. "Captain," he said finally, "I think the Council would be very interested in establishing formal diplomatic relations with humanity, as equals." Chen smiled, and for the first time since boarding the ship, Zephyx didn't find the expression terrifying. "Commander, I think that's the beginning of a very productive relationship." As Zephyx prepared to leave the human vessel, he realized that the Council's expansion into the galaxy's outer regions had just become much more complicated. But perhaps, with humans as allies, much more secure as well. The galaxy was about to learn what Earth's children could do when they had something worth protecting.